Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to OpenGov Live. Today we're going to be talking about fraud in the financial sector. It gets better, actually. We're going to go deeper in this conversation. I got Gerard McDonnell over here from SAS, who runs the practice for fraud for SAS in the ASEAN region. But before we go into this, let me just set the tone here. See what's going on in the financial world right about now. Everybody working from home, okay, in the COVID era. People thought, you know what, Gerard, life's going to be just so easy. You know, we can get everybody working digitally. The problem with that is the too many devices touching too many platforms. So let's kick this off. Hey, talk to me about fraud today, Gerard, through your perspective. And why is it so important in the digital financial world?
Well, it's worth clarifying first that fraud is a nice soft term. It's really theft under a different name. And it's two types of theft. First, it's theft of people's credentials, people's identity in some way or another, their name, their password, their telephone numbers, email addresses, all of those kind of things. And then it's secondly, theft of money. Once they've obtained enough to assume somebody's identity, then they take money. And the examples of credential theft are household names, everyday names now, like phishing, the call scams. And we've all seen an increase in those call scams since the outbreak of the pandemic. It's become almost routine now to receive these bizarre phone calls where people are asking, saying they're from the bank or from your telco or somebody, and they need some details from you in order to protect you in some way. So they appear like they're doing you a favor, but in fact they're doing you great harm. And then there's the more technical ideas like malware, which assumes or monitors your activity and takes over your identity digitally, or man in the machine, which is another way of taking over a live session when you're online doing your online banking. And then there's the softer kind of schemes we're seeing now, like fake jobs. You've probably seen out there, and I've read terrible reports of people who, of course, are more desperate for jobs now, going out and looking on the internet for jobs, applying for what they think is a perfectly good job. And they've been told, yes, you've got the job, just give us all your details for the job as an application. They're giving their bank details, they're giving their identity details and everything. And some of the scammers even have the audacity to say, all you now need to do is subscribe to this training course and you'll be ready to get the job. And they even pay money.
Wow.
And at the end of it, they get nothing at all out of it. So this is a terrible abuse of the situation people are in now as a result of the pandemic. And then, of course, we're getting other schemes, not so much in Singapore, but certainly around the other countries in ASEAN, called SIM swapping, which is where, with those credentials they've stolen, they go into not the bank, but they go into the telco, and they say, I am so-and-so, I've lost my phone, could I have a replacement SIM card, please? Which all seems kind of inert or inane, but in fact it's very profound, in that if they can take over your phone, they can then take over your one-time passwords. And that's where they can really start doing some damage. And the kind of damage you see are things like account takeover, application fraud, and now we're in the pandemic again, people are wearing masks. They're going into the bank to apply for a new account, wearing their mask, and nobody thinks, could you remove your mask? Because that's maybe contravening some kind of health and safety regulations that we've got now. And so they're going through the whole application process wearing a mask. And nobody really knows if they are the people who are genuine. So it's fake applications. And then, of course, they start laundering the money. And the new patterns that we're seeing now are purchasing refundable goods online. They're taking over your credentials to get a credit card. They're then buying a load of things online with the credit card that are refundable goods that they can take back to the shop and get cash refunds on them, or transferable in the case of a voucher, a credit voucher of some type. And we're seeing already a massive boom in that area as a result of the pandemic. In fact, Singapore is up 30% this year, or the fraud and financial crime is as a result of the outbreak. And in ASEAN countries, they're saying that it's 60% higher than the average global rate for fraud and fraud victims. So it's really bad.
Gerard, those are some insane numbers you're quoting over here. And you know what? You're right, because I've just read a report where Singapore SMEs are paying out 80% of ransomware, which has shocked everybody around here, right? You can imagine.
I mean, it just shows you how the terrible position we're being put in as a result of cybercrime in that case.
So why are we not calling this actually and emphasizing the word theft a lot more? Because I think it's the lack of education to the masses, right? They're thinking cyber, they're thinking it's not in their space. So let me ask you, let's move on to this. We got the pandemic running over here, full speed. We're doing everything digitally. This must be the best playground for these scamsters, fraudsters.
It is. It's dramatically changing our behavior as a whole. Everybody is going online now and buying online.
Right.
We've just had Black Friday and the Cyber Monday, which was the biggest e-commerce event ever in history. Why? Obviously, because everyone is now buying things as a result of, well, they're afraid of going out and exposing themselves to the pandemic. And in fact, the US spent $12 billion just in that one weekend, which is 22% higher than even last year, which was a bumpy year in itself. So really, that just telling us that we're moving into this digital world full steam ahead, and I don't believe it will go backwards.
No,
this is a one-way trip that we're going on. But more than spend, there are a lot of savvy business people out there who've actually jumped into the online world and adapted brilliantly. And there's a company not too far from here that has adapted extremely well. They were working in an industry where it was entirely face-to-face contact with their customer base. And you would argue that when a pandemic came, that would just kill their business.
Right.
But in fact, overnight, they switched over to everything being online and providing fantastically interactive events using digital media as a result. And they managed to keep that magic that they were doing with their face-to-face events online. And as a result, their business boomed. Right. And you know what? The owner is now driving around in a Maserati when there are so many other organizations of the similar type struggling to even pay their bills. And that was purely because of his incredible entrepreneurial agility in shifting into this new digital world as a result of the pandemic. So it's not all doom and gloom.
No, it is not.
But I've got to highlight that success is a double-edged sword. We're all talking about the booming of people online, booming businesses shifting into the online space. But with a growth in online activity, you get a growth in fraud opportunities.
Right.
And everyone is more exposed than really they've ever been before. We're also moving, different people who are not comfortable in this space have moved into the digital world, and they're more prone to scams and cyber attacks. We're getting an increase now in people working from home in all of the industries that we're in. And that's a change in behavior. It does encourage people to go online more than they ever have before. And that just exposes everyone much more to the things we mentioned earlier, the phishing attacks, the malware attacks, all of those kind of things.
No, and you're spot on with that, because you know what, we have a population, because exactly what you're saying to me, I got a friend of mine who turned around and said, you know what, I'm going to go and see if I can trade goods in this day and age, right? So you go into the physical shops right now because some of them are still open. And because Singapore allows that, you got social distancing, and he was able to go in there, take his old bike, buy a new Triumph, okay, and work that through and through. It's pretty incredible. So the physical space is there. But ask me, tell me about the unbanked population.
Yes.
Yeah, the ones who are not on this space right now. What's happening with them?
That's a really good question, because in the ASEAN region, particularly, you have a huge percentage of unbanked population. I mean, even countries that you would think were quite well developed these days, like Thailand, still has a 70% unbanked population.
Right.
Indonesia is 80%.
Correct.
Philippines is around 60, 70, 80% as well. So the majority of the workforce out there is relatively unbanked. There's another term is underbanked.
Underbanked.
They're underbanked.
Right.
And so what about them? This pandemic has really changed their behavior. They've had movement restrictions, where previously they were counting on the fact they could even travel between countries or between islands and all of these places. With lockdowns, that's all stopped. And with it, their livelihood has stopped too. That's caused massive cash flow constraints for them. And that with it creates credit problems that we haven't seen before. Who could have imagined this? Who could have imagined even a year ago that we would have been facing these kind of problems? And so they've had to shift into the digital world.
Correct.
And they're a very vulnerable customer base. And of course, also we're seeing this aversion to cash.
Yes. People
don't want to hand cash to you because of the fear of exposure. And I bet when you go into shops where you see people handling cash, even now you think, I bet he's got greater exposure. He's taking a huge risk by handling all of that cash and stuff. So even that simple issue is driving a behavior change in the unbanked population. And they're having to shift into being e-banked.
Right.
Instead of underbanked, e-banked, and it's go digital or go bust. So this is the new normal that we're facing.
Right. So we're talking about the I'm going to call them the non-digital native becoming digital native, right? So when governments were handing out schemes for citizens in the pandemic, you had a whole population that was being missed out because there were not any books. That's the issue. So that's why everybody's jumping on, which goes back to your initial thing why the telephone is becoming so important. Because that is where that's one step closer to being a digital native. Right?
It is having that handset in the first place is the vehicle to shifting.
Right?
Into, good point. Good point. And it's worth mentioning with this new underbanked population, as I mentioned before, really that they're very vulnerable to the scams. Those phishing attacks are so new to them; they fall for them. They become a high credit risk in themselves. For the banks, have a challenge with that. They are more likely to even share their credentials against people who could argue they should trust, like their neighbours. To say, I'm having trouble online, could you help me with this? And they give their user ID and password to their teenage neighbor to come in. He now has information that could be tempting. So you're creating a kind of a fraud industry as well. And the speed of the fraud is beyond them. The fact that if they can't grasp the concept of having their entire credit they've just gained disappear in minutes and no understanding of where it went. And of course, as I mentioned before, when people are buying the products and then taking them back, we've got the money laundering risks that are going on as well. So we talked about the behavior, we talked about the negative aspect of this. What about what's in it for the banks? Where are we with that? For the banks, though, it's this golden opportunity to get into that precious customer base they've never been able to penetrate before, that underbanked population. So it's a whole new customer base they could get into where they could generate strong trust and a long-term relationship with them. So it could be actually a really wonderful opportunity if they're prepared to cope with the fraud.
That's very interesting. Yeah, so we're talking about the digital native now, right? The citizen who was never digital savvy is becoming digital savvy. And like you said, Gerard, he or she has lots of challenges, right? Now, you also have new banks coming in play. Right? The digital bank that's never been a bank in some countries and is completely greenfield to them. But you've got a massive amount of population that's jumping onto that. What does the little bit of future look like now? Where are the challenges for all this?
Well, yeah, so I mean, the digital banks have a fantastic opportunity of being the fast fish. Okay, so what I mean by this, let me just first talk about the challenges we're facing and then I'll get on to the fast fish.
Okay.
All of us, especially the new young generations that are starting to use banking services, they want instant banking. Real time is right time, or right time is only real time. And some people have said twice the speed of light is 1 times the speed of right. It is that dramatic, really. And they don't care which channel it comes from. They don't care if they're using credit card, debit card, ATM, online banking, Grab Pay, or any of these different ones that are out there. And they want money in moments as fast as they can. The challenges are, of course, the increase in customer convenience is an increase in criminal opportunity, increase in fraud, in effect. And an increase in fraud results in an increase in money laundering.
Correct.
But let's get to that fish.
Okay.
So in this, with Klaus Schwab, the founder of the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, he came up with a phrase that says it's no longer the big fish which eats the small fish. It's the fast fish which eats the slow fish. So going back to your new banks, they have a chance of being the fast fish that are coming along, and that could be wonderful. And all of those challenges that we just talked about could turn into opportunities.
Right.
If they're challenges that their competitors are facing, they could grab this. And if they become a fast and agile organization, and take over. So it's an incredible tipping point. And so the pandemic and the drive to the change of people's behavior could be a fantastic tipping point and a golden opportunity for the new banks coming in. So it's an incredible time.